Okay, now, without further ado, we have a very exciting program for you. So let me call up our illustrious Master of Ceremonies, Frank Morano. Frank, as we affectionately known as Frankie Five Boroughs Morano, also Staten Island's favorite son. He is a walking, talking encyclopedia of local New York politics. He's amazing, and he has a radio program every Sunday morning. You can listen, you can listen in on 970 The Answer. He also produces Curtis Lewa's program, John Catsimatidis, Joe Piscopo, and a whole lot more. So let's all put your hands together and give Frankie Five Boroughs a big Queens Village Republican Club welcome.
Hello, Queens Village! 144 years, wow. Somebody told me that Phil was actually at that very first Lincoln Day 144 years ago. I don't believe that, though. It was the second. He was there with Rutherford B. Hayes. I want to thank you for having me. I know I got quite a few looks as I walked in the door today because I have two strikes against me before I even go to bat. One is that I'm not from Queens, I'm a Staten Islander, and two is that I'm not a registered Republican. So a lot of folks were quite hostile. I know Phil jeopardized his presidency. They're trying to impeach him for inviting me here. But the reason I was so eager to be here was because I come from the world of talk radio. And talk radio, in addition to being probably the last bastion of unabashed free speech left in the media sphere, it's a place where you can clap, somebody's got to stand for free speech. It's a place where every day you wage a battle based on ideas. You have to be prepared to make your case to the public on idea after idea. And that's what really makes it different. If you don't like the ideas in a book you're reading, you just turn the page. If you don't like what you're doing on the radio, you have to be prepared to engage in verbal combat at a moment's notice. And the reason that I think that has a lot in common with what you guys are doing in Queens is because if elections in Queens were based not on party labels, but on the power of ideas, you guys would be winning in a landslide. If you go out, if Vicky Palladino were to go out, and Dave Bresler were to go out, and Bob Turner were to go out, and start saying to the members of the public, whether they're Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, or Vegetarian, and say, wait a minute, do you think it's a good idea that driver's licenses for illegal immigrants should be the same as yours? I think the people would tell you soon enough. If you ask, you think it's a good idea that we close Rikers Island, where we have thousands of inmates locked up far away from you, and instead we'll put a jail around the corner from your house? I think they'd tell you what they thought of that idea. If you want to talk about the 8 specialized high schools in this city, which are actually working pretty well, and say, you know what, let's make them just as crummy as all the schools that are struggling. Then if you wage elections and battles based on ideas, like we do in talk radio, rather than partisanship, I think you'd see a different result. And Chairman Cox was very, very generous in his praise of Congressman Turner, and I certainly concur, but he neglected to mention Bob Turner's greatest accomplishment, which was as the producer of Rush Limbaugh's TV show, which is something I don't think he ever got enough credit for. Now, did anybody in this room vote for Donald Trump? Okay. So I saw a couple of people did. So I voted for Donald Trump. He's the first Republican that I ever voted for. Always a big Trump supporter from the year 2000, been wanting him to be president. I don't know if you folks remember what it was like in 2015 to tell people you were a Trump supporter. I'm not talking just about among Democrats. I'm not talking among liberals, among friends, among Republicans and conservatives. If you were to tell people you were a Trump supporter from the moment he came down the escalator, they would laugh at you. They would say, oh, he's not really running.
Then they would say, oh, well, even if he announces he's not really running. Then they would say, oh, he's just doing this as a publicity stunt. Then they would say, oh, he'll never file the financial disclosure. Oh, but he's polling first. Clearly, everybody likes him. Well, he's not going to be polling first in just a couple of months. And lo and behold, every single one of those predictions from the establishment, and I'm not just talking about Democrats here, was incorrect. At the beginning of the Trump campaign, there were two people that bought in to the dream of making America great again. One was Donald Trump, who saw us getting ripped off in China, who saw reckless free trade deals and said no more, who saw an endless flood of illegal immigrant labor competing with American jobs. And the other is with us here tonight. Corey Lewandowski believed in the president when no one else did. If you think you got laughed at when you told folks you were a Trump supporter, you can imagine what Corey went through in the purple state of New Hampshire, where he's from. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome a real warrior for liberty, a guy that has put his reputation, his time, and his energies on the line in the service of not just Donald Trump, but this country. Here's Corey Lewandowski.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, Queens Village Republican Club, let me just start by reading something that was just published in the last 30 minutes. The special counsel's investigation did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with Russia in its efforts to influence the 2016 U.S. presidential election. That's right. You know, Attorney General Barr just released that statement less than 1 hour ago. And it brings to a close the greatest witch hunt against our president in the nation's history. One year, 10 months, and 6 days later, 675 days, $25 million of your taxpaying dollars to come to the same conclusion they could have asked me about on day one. No collusion, no cooperation, no coordination between us and the Russians. See, we didn't need the Russians to win. We just had to beat Crooked H. And that wasn't that hard. Because the Russians didn't tell Crooked H not to go to Wisconsin, and not to go to Pennsylvania, and not to go to Ohio, or Michigan, or Florida, or North Carolina. She did that all on her own. But when she lost the election, because the mainstream media, and you guys remember this, on election morning, I remember it so vividly. Election morning, I picked up the failing New York Times. And do you remember what it said? Donald Trump's chances of winning are 1%. I said, holy shit, there's only two of us in the race. We got at least a 2% chance. They said, no, 1%, he has no chance to win. And then, how many people stayed up on election night? Exactly right. I had the unfortunate pleasure of being on the set of CNN on election night. And I sat next to guys like Van Jones and David Axelrod. And I'm going to tell you the story, and I know we're all in polite company here, and I'll probably get in trouble, but they can't fire me. It's already happened. I remember, look, I went to a public school. I went to the University of Massachusetts Lowell, because I wasn't a smart guy, right? But I know what they taught me there? They taught me how to add, okay? And I could count to 270, which was the number of electoral votes we needed to make Donald Trump the President of the United States. And as I watched the results come in, I saw John King at the big wall crying, "No, I think there's 3 votes left in Florida." I said, "John, it's over, baby." Florida came in, and then we won North Carolina, and then all of a sudden, for those of you who are here in New York and Manhattan, you felt the island move a little bit, right? Started to crumble because Crooked H was at the peninsula. Remember that? And the rest of the team was in Trump Tower. And what do we see? the media started going crazy. And on CNN that night, Van Jones turned to me and he said, people are afraid. They're going to be deported tomorrow. And you're a horrible person, Corey. And I remember Jeff Zucker came in after I told them at about 9:30 at night, Donald Trump is the next president-elect of the United States. And they said, we will not predict that. We will wait. And state after state, more and more. The decisive victory that Donald Trump obtained in 2016 was so decisive because of the work of guys like Ed Cox and our guys in Pennsylvania, right? We won so big, we could have lost the state of Florida and still won the election. Think about that. And I remember little Jeff Zucker rolled in and he said, Corey, you must be magnanimous tonight on television. And I said, no fucking way. I said, I can't do it. I can't do it. I said, I'm going to gloat. I'm going to be so happy. And I'm going to tell everybody. I remember I walked off the set at 4 a.m. from CNN. I got on the first plane from D.C. I flew to New York. I landed at LaGuardia. And I got in a taxi and I went up to the Upper West Side to get into a hotel because I had nowhere to stay. And I rolled into this little hotel and I wanted to check in. They said, check-in's at 4 p.m., sir. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning. And I said, man, that's a long wait. I've been in the same clothes for like 40 hours, right? But I hadn't talked to the president-elect that night because all of a sudden we had a bunch of new friends. Friends who weren't with us when he came down on the escalator. And friends who weren't with us when he launched that campaign. And I went down into this little basement of this hotel, and I'm in the gym, I'm changing my clothes, trying to wash up in the sink, and I look down, and my phone's ringing. And I look across, it says, Donald J. Trump. And I answer the phone, and I said, yes, Mr. President. And he said to me, Corey. And I said, sir, did you hear what I just said? You're the fucking President of the United States. And he said, can you believe it? And I said, no. And he said, me neither. And he said, let's go change the world together. And I said, yes, sir. He said, come over and see me. And I remember walking in Trump Tower just a few hours later, and you guys from New York remember it because it was front to back dump trucks full with sand surrounding Trump Tower. They had Secret Service agents all over the place because the transition of power was now taking place. And, you know, over at the Peninsula Hotel, I think they were seeing a heavily medicated Crooked H trying to find a way down the stairs. But it was a special, special time. But because of the help of you and so many like you around the country, let me just tick through what this president's been able to do in 2 short years. See, he made some promises to the American people that he's kept. One of the promises he made, he said, for every new government regulation we put in, we're going to eliminate 2. And I said, sir, you didn't hold to that promise. Because for every new government regulation he put in, he eliminated 22. You know what that means? More money for small businesses and taking the burden of the government off of their back. He said, Corey, we're going to take care of our friends and we're going to punish our enemies. And one of the things he did, even though 12 candidates before him had pledged to do it, he moved the embassy in Israel to the rightful location. And this week, what did the president do? He recognized Israel's rights over the Golan Heights. Our friends are going to know when we're with them. But our enemies are also going to know when we're against them. See, this president is not like Barack Obama, who draws a line in the sand and allows them to walk over it. This is not a president who's apologetic to be an American. He's proud to make sure that everyone knows we're the greatest country in the world. And when Bashir al-Assad decided to use chemical weapons against innocent men, women, and children in his country, the United States led the effort to put 59 Tomahawks into Syria. Because it's important. And when the people of Venezuela have called for help, the United States have led the effort to overthrow a regime that has destroyed the people of that country. And think about what this president has said. We can't continue to be the policemen of the world. We're going to bring our men and women home, our men and women who serve in uniform. We're going to bring them back. We're going to protect our homeland as opposed to protecting others. And one of the Democrats said, No. We don't want our men and women home. We don't want to secure our southern border. This is the party that we fight every day. The Democrats have become the party of warmongers, the party of fourth-term abortion, which is a term I'd never heard of before. See, where I come from, fourth-term abortion is called murder. You're not allowed to have a baby and then kill that baby afterwards, but that's what the Democrats are. In the last spending bill that this president had to fight for, we got $1.375 billion in funding for our wall on the southern border. We gave foreign aid in the amount of 40 times more than that overseas as opposed to taking care of our people here at home. And that's why the president declared an emergency declaration. Because we have a humanitarian crisis on the southern border that we need to solve. You talk about what this president has done at the judiciary. Fundamentally transforming our Supreme Court with 2 conservative Supreme Court justices there and 1 more to come. And if you think the left put up a fight for Kavanaugh, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because if RBG is the next one to go, and the president appoints a conservative Catholic woman to that seat, the heads left will absolutely explode. And it's not just the Supreme Court, it's the lower courts and the appellate courts where he's filled 100 different vacancies right now that we will fundamentally transform the way our court system works, which means no longer legislating from the bench, but making sure we have a strict understanding of the Constitution, which is the way our forefathers expected the courts to run. Then you think about the tax cuts that this president pushed through in the first 2 years. The largest tax cut in our nation's history, and he did it with the Republicans kicking and screaming. Look, we came to Washington, they didn't hand us the keys. Mitch and Paul didn't say, hey, Mr. President, whatever you want to do, we're on board. They fought us every step of the way in the first 2 years, okay? And the reason we don't have immigration reform is because Paul Ryan didn't want to have immigration reform. We still have hundreds of appointments that are sitting in front of the U.S. Senate because they haven't changed the rules. And look, if we think for 1 second, if the Democrats take control of the U.S. Senate, they're going to keep the rule of 60 votes in place, we're naive. Because they're going to change it in 1 second. You know why? Because let me tell you where the Democratic Party is going, and you know this. They're going by the way of AOC. They're going by the way of these 2 socialist lunatic women, right? Who are now complaining that after 200 years in Congress, they opened Congress with a prayer, and that's now offensive. A non-denominational prayer is offensive, and they're going to re-look at that. And the scariest part is, Nancy Pelosi is the moderate. Think about that for a second. Nancy Pelosi is the adult in the room, and she's the moderate, and it should scare you. But look, let me just touch on something that's very important. Attorney General Barr issued his report just an hour ago, and as we said, there was no collusion. But let me tell you what the Clinton campaign and the Obama administration did to some of you in this room probably. I know they did it to me. They spied on us because they didn't like our politics. They spied on the people who worked in Trump Tower because they didn't agree with what we believed in, which is smaller government, lower regulation, and less taxes. This was their insurance policy. They spied on American citizens on domestic soil in a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment, and guys like Jim Comey and Andy McCabe, and the lovers Strzok and Page, and James Baker, right? And Brennan, and Clapper, and Susan Rice, they all knew about it. Don't kid yourself. They all knew about it. And look, in the book I just wrote, I asked the president, it was the only interview the president's done in the book in the first 2.5 years of his administration. I said, sir, we're in the Oval Office, an amazing place. I said, sir, do you think Barack Obama knew that they were spying on you and our team? You know what he said? He looked around, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders was in the room with us. And me and Dave Bossy, my colleague, he says, what the hell do I care? You bet your ass they knew. And if I did it to them, it would have been called treason and we'd be in jail for the rest of our lives. But Trump was never supposed to win. And now, there's a reckoning coming. And we had better hold people accountable who broke the law. Look, the Mueller report is over. It's time to hold Jim Comey and Andy McCabe and Peter Strzok accountable for their crimes against this country. I want to thank you guys for being the home of Donald John Trump and his family. I want to thank you all for instilling the hard work and values that he has brought to the White House with him, that he learned living in this community growing up. This is a man, and you know this, who works 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. Look, when I was on the campaign with him, I was drinking 15 Monsters a day. Okay? And one day, I'm on the airplane, I put my head down for about 15 seconds. He looked back, he says, "Hey, Corey, if you can't take it, we'll get somebody else." I said, "I haven't slept in 2 years." And he said, "Tough it out, kid." I said, "Yes, sir." But that's who he is, and he fights every day. But look, if we were just fighting the Democrats, we win, okay? But we're not. We're fighting the fake news every single day. You know, I had the privilege on Friday to do a couple TV shows. I was on Martha McCallum on Fox, and then I went on and did Trish Regan Friday night on Fox Business. And I came home, and I got to my house, and my wife and I turned on television. I wanted to see what the other side was saying, so I turned on CNN. This was the day that the Mueller report was submitted to the Attorney General's office, and we all knew there was no collusion coming. I turned on CNN at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, on probably the biggest day of the Mueller investigation. And do you know what Anderson Cooper's talking about? Anybody see this crazy stuff? He's talking about the 2005 Hurricane Katrina. Because they can't bring themselves to the fact that Donald Trump didn't break the law to win. Right? Because that's all they did. And every day, that's what they have espoused. And I am looking forward to the day that they start apologizing to the president and his family for the way that they've maligned him. $600,000 new manufacturing jobs alone. 5 million new jobs, the lowest unemployment rate for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and women ever recorded. Criminal justice reform. Let me tell you something, friends. Donald Trump, when he ran, was called a racist, and a misogynist, and a hater. He's an equal opportunist, because I know it. He treats everybody the same. And let me tell you where this campaign's going in 2020. If Donald Trump receives 10% of the African American vote in 2020, there's no mathematical formula that the Democrats can win. See, the Democrats want to play the party of racism. But Donald Trump doesn't see it that way. He gives everybody the same chance. Creating opportunities and new jobs helps everybody. And what that means is the African American community that supported Donald Trump at 6% in the 2016 election is twice as much as Mitt Romney got and 3 times more than John McCain got. And we're going forward. So I'm here to tell you, we've got some great news ahead of us. We've got some great opportunities in front of us. But I also want to tell you something that's very special. I had the privilege to be the chairman of the Vice Presidential Selection Committee. So I had the job that Dick Cheney had, I just didn't pick myself, right? Which maybe I could have carried New Hampshire, I'm not sure, maybe I could have been on the ticket. But I'm going to tell you this story because it's really important. The first time I had the privilege to walk through the doors of the Oval Office to see then President-elect Trump was about 3 weeks after he was sworn in. Look, he's busy, right? And he always says, "Hey, Cor, come over and see me." I said, "Sir, you have a lot of guards around you. You don't just get to roll by, right? They shoot you over there at the White House and try and jump the fence." "No, come on over," he says. So I called over and I went to go see him. And I had never been through those hallowed doors into that Oval Office where every president except George Washington had sat and served. And I know this is a Lincoln Day dinner. And I respect our 16th President of the United States. And I respect our 40th President of the United States. But I love our 45th President of the United States. I grew up in a town called Lowell, Massachusetts, a very blue-collar town. I didn't have any privilege growing up. And a kid from Lowell, Massachusetts stood outside the doors of the Oval Office with the President of the United States sitting there and the Vice President sitting in front of him with his back to me. And the President looked up, as he had done so many times when I was on the 26th floor of Trump Tower on 5th Avenue, and he said, "Hey, Cor, get in here." And I stepped through those doors where the lives of every American have changed by the decisions made behind that resolute desk. And the President turned to the Vice President and said, "Hey, Mike, do you know who that is?" And the Vice President said, "Yes, sir, that's Corey." And he said, "Hey, Mike, do you know who this is?" He asked him a second time. And the Vice President said, "Sir, it's Corey Lewandowski. Of course I know who that is." And he said, "Mike, he's the man who said you could be the Vice President of the United States." And I said, "Well," I said, "about 60 million people might have said that, sir. I had a small part." And then the Vice President stood up from his chair, and this is who he is, and you have to understand. He stood up from his chair and he said, "Corey, take my seat." And I said, "Sir, I cannot do that. I'll sit next to you." And I sat next to the Vice President of the United States. He was to my immediate left, and I was dead center on the resolute desk talking to the President. He called Hope Hicks in. He said, "Hope, come in here." And she sat next to me, and we talked about the campaign and how amazing it had been and the amazing place that we were in, the Oval Office. And the Vice President turned to me and said, "Corey, can you do me a favor?" I said, "I'll do anything, Mr. Vice President. What do you need?" He said, "I have to give a speech tonight. I'd like you to bow your head and pray with me. Would you do that right now?" My first time in the Oval Office. I said, "Of course." And he sat, put his head down. He asked for God's grace and blessing as he watched over him on behalf of all the citizens of this country, that he could go out and represent them to the best of his ability with God's guidance. And he said, "Amen." And I said, "Amen." I lifted my head, and Trump stood up and hit Mike on the shoulder. He says, "Don't go out and screw this thing up, Mike." Because that's who he is. And I tell you that story because you have to understand how powerful a team we have fighting for us every day. Every day, President Trump wakes up, he steps out of his residence and says, "Who are we fighting for today?" And he goes down and he fights for the American people. He fights against our enemies. He fights for our allies. And I am so proud that I had a very small role in help making him the 45th President of the United States. And let me finish with this. You know, he's tough. I've had my head torn off many times. And about 3 weeks ago, I did a couple TV shows. I did Ari Melberg on MSNBC. I did The Great Lou Dobbs on Fox Business. Then I did Chris Cuomo on a Friday night, right? I ran the gauntlet, the three of them. And the next morning, I was on my way up to do a Fox and Friends hit, and I looked down, and the President was calling me. And I was in the car with my two boys. I got an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. And I put the phone on speakerphone to answer it, and I said, "Good morning, Mr. President." And he said, "Corey, Melania saw you on Chris Cuomo last night. She said you were amazing." And I said, "Well, thank you, sir. I did my best." He goes, "I watched you. You sucked." I said, "Whoa! You were weak." And I said, "Thank you, sir." He says, "You better get tough." And I said, "Yes, sir." And then I said, "I'm on my way to do Fox." He says, "Here's what you're going to say." Bing, 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 bing. So I went up and I did Fox and Friends, and I left the studio, and he called me back. He said, "My man is back." I said, "Thank you, sir." Because he loves fighters, right? He's unapologetic for what he stands for. We don't apologize for being the greatest country in the world. We don't apologize for being tough. We don't apologize for making sure that socialism does not take hold in this country. That's our president, and I'm proud to serve alongside him, and I'm proud to be here today with you guys. I want to thank you so much for inviting me. I want to tell you how much of an honor it is to be back in New York with Ed and the guys who I fought with every single day. The welcomeness that you shared with me when I worked in Trump Tower every day, the support you give to our president every day. I was with you guys at the inauguration. I came to the New York party because I want to remind you, if it wasn't for you helping us be successful, not just here in Queens, but across the country, we wouldn't be here. And if it wasn't for the support and values that Donald Trump learned in Queens, we wouldn't be here. And think about the way we're going to leave this country after 6 years of Donald Trump and hopefully 8 more years of Mike Pence. We're going to give our country to our children and our grandchildren in the same manner that our parents left it to us, better than we inherited it. Because if we don't, if the Democrats win in 2020, this blip in the radar will go away lickety-split. The $22 trillion we have now will be a rounding error for their Green New Deal, which costs $93 trillion by every government estimate. That's the government estimates, which if you guys have ever seen the government, they're usually half of what things really cost. It will bankrupt our country. There'll be no more airplanes, no more cars, and no more cows, because that's what these guys believe in. So I leave you with this. I ask for your help and I ask for your support for the president, but it's not enough just for the people in this room. The Democrats are highly motivated with 16 Democrats already in the field. They're identifying their voters. They're registering people. They want to lower the voting age to 16. They want to pack the Supreme Court, and they want to turn our country upside down. So you're in this room because you're special and you care. I need you to go out and find 10 more people just like you. I need you to go and register new voters. I need to make sure that we have doubled our efforts of what we did in 2016, because that's the only way we're going to win in 2020. We're not going to sneak up on them in 2020. We need to make sure they know we're coming and we steamroll over them. Thank you so very much for being here tonight.
Give it up for Corey Lewandowski. You got to check out his book, Trump's Enemies.